Right, that was clearly a lot of fun and brilliance. A lot of ideas that have been thrown up, and we are now ready for our next panel, which is taking aim at 2030, the next generation of change agents. And we all know that millennials are the largest generation alive, those born between 1982 and 2002, those coming of age in this slightly used millennium, total 1.8 billion globally out of 7 billion overall. And in the United States, they're the largest generation, amounting to nearly 1 of 3 Americans, or 92 million out of 307. So if there is any doubt why we've been paying special attention to this powerhouse generation, these numbers obviously would clear it up. But as we heard from yesterday, Fiza Farhan, it's not just an age thing, it is an ideas thing. And so our next panel is testimony to that. And to bring that proof to you, let me invite my friend, Ravi Karkara, who has the good fortune to moderate this concluding panel. Ravi?
Thank you very much. I'm using the hand mic. My name is Ravi Karkara, and I work with UN Women as a senior advisor. But also, I've been working in the youth space for a very long time. I'm very grateful to Web's team, Ursula, and everybody for having this panel. I think it's come at a very important time because 3 days ago, UN Women launched its youth and gender equality strategy, and it's about empowered young men and young women in gender equality. And without further ado, I actually want to invite a fantastic panel of young women leaders and a young men feminist. So I'm actually going to invite Tenille from Trinidad, who's a great singer and a big activist. Tenille, please take a seat. May, can I come to you, please, from Laos? May is another great story about young women's empowerment. And a dear friend, Holly, from Australia, who's really been walking the talk about young women's leadership, but also economic empowerment. Let's welcome Holly. And my brother here, who's a great friend, Ari, who's a young man feminist from Cameroon. Please, let's welcome him too. So, I want to indulge before I get into this session and get people talking, because we had a very interesting conversation. I was speaking to somebody early on. I said, I wish gender equality was about distributing water bottles. We just go and give it to everybody. Unfortunately, it's not. It's about, as you said in your last panel, you've been discussing this for the last 2 days. It is about behavioral change. So I'm actually going to ask you to leave your pens and everything and do a small game with me and just identify a partner next to you, A and B. Somebody next to you, just find a person. Have a person become, one person becomes A and the other one becomes B. So, Ari, you can do it with Holly, and you can do it with May.
Yeah.
Everybody has a partner, A and B.
A and B. Yeah.
So it'll take less than 5 minutes to do this. Everybody, all the A's, can I see your hands up, please?
Yeah.
With your lovely hands, make them into a fist here. All the A's. Bring your fist forward. And B's, on a count of 1, 2, 3, I'm going to challenge you to get the fist open.
Oh, sorry.
Okay? B's, A's, keep them tight, and the challenge is to get them open. 1, 2, and 3. Get it open.
Oh. I should just let you.
It's like shaking hands.
Lovely friends, thank you. Thank you, guys. Round 2. Everybody, round 2. Okay, folks, friends. Round 2, B's, can I see your hands up? Okay, lovely. Now make a fist, B's, and bring it forward. Now A's, on a count to 1, 2, 3, get it open. 1, 2, and 3. Lovely, everybody. So before I open the panel, friends, before I open the panel, honest confession in the room, How many of you were able to get the fist open? Second confession. How many of you did not use physical force? Let's give them a round of applause. You know, the question was, get it open. Nowhere I said use force. But still, a number of people in the room have been conditioned for years and years to follow a certain pattern. So gender equality
That's awesome.
is to question that pattern. What I have been socialized as a man to believe that young women or women are not same as me. Luckily, I have a twin sister. So I was conceived not as I was conceived as we. I'm very fortunate. And I was brought up by a male feminist father, and you heard my friend yesterday, Josh, who talked about, all in. And you heard my mentor this morning, Michael Kaufman, who started the White Ribbon Campaign. He was telling me, come here, and somehow we missed each other. And here are young people here who've been doing this. So let's give a big round of applause, everybody. Gender equality is about behavioral change and attitude transformation. So without further ado, I'm actually going to start with my friend here, May, who has been challenging the system and has a strong personal story. And May, the question to really you is, while you introduce yourself, is why are you here today? So May, over to you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for having me here. It's my great pleasure to be here because I want to change, I want to influence my families and my community. So I'm from a very conservative community where daughters need to quit school to help family for their livings, and then only sons are being sent to school. So unfortunately, I'm not that kind of person. So I work very hard to do whatever I can to go to universities, and thanks to my parents and my uncle who support me to follow my dreams. So 7 years with the bank, I started from a very junior positions, and now I'm one of the leaders of the company, growing about 80%, driving 80% of the revenue for the banks in Laos. The reason why I do this, because I want to change the mindset of my community to support gender equality, not keeping daughters at home, but to give them equal rights to go to schools, and that means better life for their future. So I strive myself working very hard to be a successful banker, so that my community see me as a role model, so that they can consider sending their daughters to university to be able to access to better careers and better future. So I know that it's very small story for you, but it's a big deal for me and my family. So now when I'm going home, my hometown, people will say, hey May, how are you? So it's a very successful for me that I can influence them to change the mindset, to send their daughters to school, and that means gender equality. And I cannot do this without my great support from my husband, who share a primary care of my 3 kids when I work very hard. So he's my mentor, pushing me to go for a bigger job, so go mom. So, for everyone here, I think it's very important for us as a woman. We can be a good mom as well as a good working woman. But then we need to have a very great support from our family, our husband. So I encourage everyone here, gentlemen, support your wife, and you will see a great progress in your wife in their career. Thank you.
Thank you very much, May. Let's hear a big round of applause. Absolutely lovely, and I have a personal story I was telling me about my own mother who fought and came out of the system, and her mother gave her 2 gold jewelry and said, go and study. And she became the first one to finish an MSc in nursing. And I was telling that what inspired me to become a feminist is really my mother, my wife, and my daughter today, and my twin sister. So really, thank you so much, May, for sharing such a personal story. We feel very, very lucky that you're doing it here. So one more applause, please. So I have another great champion who I've started to admire so much over the last few months, and I was introduced to her by my colleagues in UN Global Compact, who's a songwriter, but she's a music activist of gender equality, if I'm allowed to say that, Tanil. And she recently launched her song on the International Women's Day, I'm a Girl. So Tanil, the question really is, while you introduce yourself, is you've been using music as a very important tool to talk about social justice and gender equality. Why?
Hi, how's everyone doing today? Yeah, I decided to use music as a tool for activism because to me, I don't see the point in doing it unless to do it for, my mic's not working, so give me another mic. Thank you. Yeah, for me, music is a tool to be used for activism because I don't understand people who have a platform but don't use that platform for good. So it was never really a question for me. It was always part of what my purpose is and why I'm doing what I'm doing with my music. I Am a Girl is a song specifically about gender equality. It's about the empowerment of young girls, young women and girls around the world. And the reason why I wrote it and why I released it was because I wanted women and girls to connect to that thing inside of them. As young girls, we have that feeling inside of us that we can genuinely be whatever we want to be. And as we get older and we have all of these society's expectations on us, as well as how we're being portrayed by mainstream media, we start to lose sight of that, and we start to feel like we have to fit into gender stereotypical roles. We start to feel like we have to start families at a certain age or by a certain point in time. There are all these things that kind of hinder us from really feeling that freedom that we felt when we were young girls. So that's why the song is called I Am a Girl. And yeah, and all of my music does have a message. I think that it's important that when you do have that ability to speak out and when you have the ability to be heard, that you say something worth saying and something worth hearing. So yeah, I wouldn't want to do music unless I do it for that cause.
Absolutely lovely, thank you. And of course, we'll not let go of Tanil because at the end of the session, we're going to request you to perform the most amazing song which is going rounds all over the girls' movement, the adolescent girls' movement, the young women's movement, the women's movement, everybody, as your song captures the entire life cycle of feminism, which is brilliant. So again, thank you so much for being here. So here's my brother, Ari, who I met a few years ago, and he comes with a very strong commitment at an individual but also personal level on gender equality, and has been now running the Junior Chamber International, which was started about 100 years ago. And they've been very strongly advocating on the citizenship platform. So my question really is, with your own work on working with JC's young women leaders and JC's who are also working on promoting gender equality, if you could share your own commitment, but also I would say the vast network's commitment on gender equality, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ravi. And I feel lucky to be up here with these beautiful women. And as I look around the room, I'm wondering where are the men? Right? There's very few of us here, but this conversation should be had with men in the room as well. I just want us to imagine what it would look like 10 years from now, that people will gather here in New York on the 16th of March, 10 years from now, and what will be the conversation that they will be having in this room. If they are having the same conversation that we are having today, we would have failed in our responsibility as leaders or citizens of the world. The conversation they should be having should be very different from what we're having today. It shouldn't be any more about women's empowerment. But the reason I say this is because I work for an organization that empowers young people to create positive change in their communities. It's our responsibility to ensure that the next generation of young people are empowered with this knowledge so that this is no longer a problem in tomorrow's society. Now, I'm going to use an example, an experience that I had. I remember the first time there was a civil strife in Cote d'Ivoire. I traveled to Cote d'Ivoire. Our organization there was struggling. People had been displaced. People had lost their jobs because of the war. And I sat in our national secretariat, and we're trying to figure out how we will rebuild our organization in Cote d'Ivoire. And I looked around, and it was all men sitting around the table who had been past presidents. And I said, where are the women in this country? Because if we have to solve the problem of Cote d'Ivoire, we cannot solve it by talking to you, the men. We have to talk to the women. So I stood up and I challenged the national organization in Cote d'Ivoire, and I said, it's been 40 years, and we've never had a female president in this national organization. I'm going to walk out of this General Assembly room, and I'm only going to come back in if you elect a female president. And they did it. And since then, this was 2005. In 2005, we had a female president. In 2007, we had a female president. In 2009, we had a female president. But the fact that they elected a female president saved our organization in that country and enabled the organization to give a lot more opportunities to young people. And this is the same case. I just traveled to India because we have a huge organization there with 22,000 members. And for 60 years, they had gone without a female president. And 2 years ago, I had challenged them to say, you can't continue like this, especially in this country. That should be a trailblazer for the rest of the world. And behold, they elected their first president this year. And that was the first national organization I decided to visit to show support for the women. I come from Africa originally. I'm from Cameroon. And I know that one of Africa's greatest leaders, who didn't last long, Thomas Sankara, discovered a long time ago that you had to give opportunities to women if we had to build a society together. Now at JCI, we are trying to make sure that young people embrace this as a habit, so it's second nature, so that 10 years from today, we are no longer talking about this.
Thank you very much, Ari. I think it's a very interesting book about habits, and I don't know, how do you make gender equality a habit? You know, that'll be the day that gender equality actually becomes a habit of every single man, which is so much needed. So again, thank you so much for bringing that perspective of, especially India, where I come from, of the newly elected woman president there too. So with that, somebody who I have been, offline, online, on every space has been Holly, who a few years ago was leading the Youth 20 Summit in Australia. That really talks about her big, industrial way of operating, of pulling together different actors and delivering a very, very historic event of Y20. Because, I think it's high time that we start using gender-sensitive and gender-inclusive language. And you really changed the notion of historic youth summit in Mexico to a historic summit in Australia, which I think was very, very exciting. But then you also took on this whole area of young women entrepreneurship. And I know that journey is very much just beginning. So with that, I would really like to, hear about your personal story. Why are you here today on this panel? So let's welcome Holly, please.
Thanks, mate. Thank you, Ravi. And as was already been said, it's such a privilege to be here today with all of you and alongside such an exceptional group of panelists. And I'd like to thank Ravi as well for being such an extraordinary champion in this space and for ensuring that platforms like this and UN Global Compact for working in partnership to make it happen are provided for young people to be a part of this conversation. From a young women's entrepreneurship side of things, I've started my first business when I was 19 and I am an entrepreneur now. But my passion for this really started when I was in Kenya. I'd gone to start a microfinance project in Korogocho. And for me, it was the moment where I understood the importance of entrepreneurship and the economic empowerment of women, both for here and now, but also in an intergenerational context. So in Korogocho, we were working with a group of 22 women who were earning an average about 50 cents a day. and we're trying to feed anywhere from 5 to 11 children on that. And it's this incredibly humbling situation to find yourself in working with a group of women like that. And when you gather them around, you talk to them about what is it, if we're creating business plans, that you want your businesses to be able to create. And you've got all 22 of them coming back to you with the same 3 things. They want to put food on the table, they want to be able to put an actual roof over their children's head, and they want to be able to send their children to school. I found it really interesting because in this group we had varying degrees of English competency. So some were drawing, some were writing stories. But what was amazing to me was with the education piece in particular, a lot had either specifically drawn a girl or had written about their daughters when it came to education. And so I said to the woman who was commanding this group, why is it specifically you're talking about your girls with regards to education? And they said, it's because we want our daughters to have the choices that we never had. And that significance of business being a vehicle for the next generation to have different choices, I think, was a really powerful point. You know, over the course of 12 months working with that community, those 22 women in business lifted 137 people directly out of poverty. And so the power of that for me was quite extraordinary, to lift in the here and now, but to think about the significance that would have for the opportunities of the next generation. Ravi alluded to the G20. I think for me, that was where it came to life that we needed more work happening in this space at a macro level, at a governmental level, and working in conjunction with business. Because I found myself in these conversations, both in a global entrepreneurship space and also in this women's participation dialogue, because there was a lot around how do we get more women in the labour force, that was continually talking about how do we help women to become employees. And don't get me wrong, that conversation needs to continue with full gusto because we're not there. We know that. You know, when you look at the studies that, 865 million women are still disengaged from the economy to some degree, and 90% of countries have some kind of legal barrier. We know we've got more work to do. But this specific piece on young women's entrepreneurship, the reason I'm passionate about it is because we've got to play for where the world is going. With automation, with 42% of jobs disappearing, with what we know will likely be created out of that creative disruption, the fact that there will be jobs that will be increasingly technically literate, scientific, mathematically based, we have a generation who are going to have to be enterprising career-wise because jobs don't exist in the way that they used to. The importance of ensuring we have our young women's capability built in order to be able to ensure they can succeed in that environment is critical to ensuring not only we don't go backward, but we go further ahead in the next generation. And that's why I'm really feel so privileged to have the opportunity to co-chair the UN's Global Coalition on Young Women Entrepreneurs and to help advance this conversation.
Great, thank you very much, Holly. We'll do another set of questions, but just before that, I also want to take the opportunity. I spoke about the UN Women's LEAPS framework, which is very much coming out of the inspiration from leaders such as here on this dais and many of you. L stands for Leadership of Young Women in All Spheres Strengthened, be it economic, social, political, cultural, civil, or environmental leadership. It's very much the leadership all four of you talked about. E is for economic empowerment and skills development. Because we notice that when you look at the youth skills conversation, it's very much young men dominated. So we really wanted to bring this very clear focus on young women's skill, looking at STEM, looking at reforming the secondary and post-secondary education system, and action to end violence against young women and girls. And I saw some of that being reported back, which is very, very critical. The 3 Ps that we talk about in the LEAPS framework, and I'll tweet this out later, and you can get a copy, or UN Global Compact has already tweeted it. You can always go there and get it. The first P is about participation, voice, and partnerships with young women-led networks and movements. And I think the business space, we really want to come behind supporting young women entrepreneurs and business women across the world. The second piece is very much about people like Ari and the other men sitting in the room, is about working with young men in gender equality, including in the business and the private and public sector space. And last is probably, I don't know if I'm that old, but it's really about creating those intergenerational partnerships throughout the life cycle to achieve gender transformative society. And the reason I say that is because, we need to just not look at a conversation with young women and older women. And that's why, Tennille with her song, I'm a Girl, is very critical, because girls need to see who are the role models. Adolescent girls need to see who are the other young women models, role models like Holly and some of you in the room, to really create that, I would say the spiral of creating gender transformative society. So with that note, we have a huge opportunity with the Sustainable Development Goals that you've been discussing for the last 2 days. While there's a lot of focus on SDG 5 and a specific set of indicators, but we also know very clearly that we cannot, and there's no way we can achieve the Sustainable Development Goal, all 17 of them, with one eye closed. We must make sure that every single woman, young woman and a girl child benefits and has impacted through the SDG implementation. And that's why when UN Women brought together about 81 heads of states on September 27th, there was a very clear timeline to achieve a planet 50-50 by 2030. And I came up with this very inspiring morning session with Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, and to get member states coming behind it, it's absolutely phenomenal. So on that note, I would also open up a set of questions, and we have questions and answers out there, is to all the leaders here on gender equality and women's empowerment, to see if you had to give a piece of advice to this amazing set of people who've been championing gender equality and women's empowerment in their spaces, how would they really look at, the question would be, how can they strengthen working with the next generation, young women, and also young men feminists, who can create that ecosystem so that we can actually make WEPS a reality, in the existing businesses and the businesses that are yet to come that Holly talked about. So I'm going to give that your question, and you can pass on the mic. You have it?
Yep. I think what business here can do is, to create flexibility at work so that young women or young mom can benefit from being at work and being at home, so that they help advance their career as well. So flexibility at work is something that helps support young women at work.
Could you define a little bit about flexibility and what kinds of flexibilities?
It can be, part-time work, or it can be 4 days a week, so that help working mom to take care of the kids, and then as well as to be able to progress their career at work. So it doesn't necessarily that they need to take time off to take care of the family when they have any issues. So it can be one of the things that we all business here can do immediately, change the policy, introduce flexibility at work that can help women, young women, so that they can progress their career.
Thank you very much. Tanil, over to you.
I would say that the best thing that we could do collectively is to break away from the gender stereotypes that we have. And I think that, not only with the music that I'm doing, but I also run a nonprofit organization with one of my best friends, and it's called EPIC. It stands for Everyday People Initiating Change. And we drill clean water wells in Tanzania, as well as work on community growth and development there too. So we're working directly with women in these communities and young girls in the communities as well, and empowering them and breaking away from the gender stereotypes that they have there. And that has definitely impacted the work that I do here as well. And for me, I definitely don't think that I personally fit into what is perceived to be the gender stereotypical role of a woman my age. But I've never cared about that. I've never paid any attention to that. It's difficult sometimes, obviously, when, again, there are the society's expectations. But I think that collectively, if we continuously work towards not paying attention to those things as men and women, I think it's not just for women, but men too. You were saying that your husband is your greatest mentor because he is not allowing, but he has taken on the non-traditional role, and you've now been able to do what you're doing. I think that that's incredible, and I think that collectively, again, that's something that we can all do, is to just take and also within the media, that's going to force media to change what we're seeing in media, which I think is very important too, because obviously that plays a part in telling young girls and young boys what they can or can't be. So I think that if we ask for what we want to be seeing in media, then media will have to shift and change accordingly.
Thank you, Tennille, and over to you, Ari. But also it'll be great for you to talk about in the context of what you did with the MDG implementation.
Yes. Thank you very much, Ravi. In fact, I came along with me a report that we put together about how my organization did implement the Millennium Development Goals. And one of those goals was on gender equality, and I opened up the page and I immediately looked at about 20 projects that were done around the world in terms of women empowerment. Really, this conversation has to go local in the sense that people are going to learn, this is going to become part of the way we live our lives if we create the opportunities at a local level for people to participate in development. We at JCI created something called the Active Citizen Framework, which is just a mundane process on how people can identify what the needs are within their communities. And in every community, I don't know whether it's developed or less developed or developing, there is a need. And that need is the participation of citizens in nation building or community development. And when you begin to identify the participation of citizens, and we know that in most communities, it's almost a 50-50 split or sometimes more in favor of women, bringing the communities to participate in development definitely means that we absolutely need women as partners in development at a local level. And if you begin locally and you begin with young people and making them understand that we have to work in partnership as equals towards developing our societies and creating opportunities for women locally through small things, participating in development, I think the conversation will have to be will be different. And that's how we at JCI have approached it, whether it's in the case of, there's a case, one of the projects I just looked at in Panama, where the women were brought together. They weave local cloths, but they were brought together by our organization there, not just as individuals, but how they could create an enterprise that really became the backbone of the community in which they lived in and created many more opportunities for women, their children, their families, and it's transforming society as a whole. Or projects that are done in Bangladesh where they actually started out with trying to educate women on maternal health care. And they brought these women all the time to these seminars. And they said, what do you do after you go back home? And the women basically went and stayed back home. And our organization said, we can't continue doing this. We have to figure out what the women can do so that they are at an advantaged position. We cannot just continue providing a service for them. And they created opportunities for them to create a cooperative through farming that they were just doing behind their houses. They were able to help them get their products to the market. But through small initiatives, we can actually, the key here is sustain this movement so that this movement actually becomes a way of life. And then we can move on to address other pertinent issues in humanity.
Thank you, Ari. And so, Holly, I'm just tweaking the question a bit because you talked about a need for a global coalition on young men entrepreneurs. And in the introduction of this panel, we also heard we're talking about 1.8 billion, and out of that 1.8 billion is 900 million young women, which is a huge opportunity. So Holly, if you can really speak to everybody here, that why do you think it's so important in the next 15 years to look at this potential?
Yeah, I think the importance of it goes without saying. I mean, it's so critical, and it's part of why this group in an interagency network had worked so hard at bringing together the first youth CSW, and it was fantastic to see such an incredible response. We would have Skype calls every week where you would watch the world map light up as this army of youth volunteers who are passionate about allowing young people the opportunity to contribute to this space and make a meaningful impact, join the call and work to make it happen. If I can focus the things I think hopefully this room can play a role in, quite pragmatically to things I hope individually everyone could do. It's been really interesting coming here. It's my first CSW. I have learnt so much, and I thank every woman who has shared her story and has spoken to me, every man who's, again, expressed their passion or their experience on this issue. It's been phenomenal. And one of my observations as a first-timer is there are very few entrepreneurs here, if any. In fact, I've barely heard that word in conversation over the course of this week so far. And it's great. I know a few of you are wavering at me right now, which is awesome. And this is arguably, there's maybe not some overlap between some of the people at this conversation and CSW at large. I guess my point there, though, is it would be fantastic to see young entrepreneurs coming and sponsored to be a part of this conversation, either by country delegations and or by you yourselves, invited to the table next year. We would love to see young women entrepreneurs participating in this conversation. And that two-way exchange of ideas and experiences, I think, would not only be beneficial for the policy outcomes, the declarations, but certainly for day-to-day, the reality of how we're strong advocates in our communities, how our business and our social work impacts what it is we're doing. I think the second thing that it's really interesting when you look at one of the major challenges we've got to overcome in terms of supporting women entrepreneurs, it's estimated by the IFC that we've got a $285 billion funding gap for female entrepreneurs. So 70% of female entrepreneurs say they do not have adequate funding to support their business. So when we look at that and we know that 70% of women businesses, only 7% are funded by venture capitalists, we need to start looking at what are the ways, what are the collaborative crowdfunding sorts of platforms that are out there, or the creative ways we can start thinking or working in collaboration with our financial markets to steward more capital to women. And to that end, I look at things like the Radical Generosity Fund in Canada, the SheEO movement, where we had 500 women in Canada just give $1,000 and create a pool of capital for young women entrepreneurs to play for and to have the opportunity to really advance and grow their business. Really interesting model driven by grassroots women coming together and saying, this is something we want to do, we want to make a change around. But even thinking personally, if you want to make a contribution in a different sort of way, how can you use a crowdfunding platform or something like that to back a female entrepreneur in the 12 months ahead? That would be fantastic.
Thank you so much, Holly. I know that we are probably running late, and I'll just open up the floor, just quickly take one question from that side, one from there. So yes, sir, please, if you can introduce yourself and just direct the question. Anybody this side? Okay.
Yes, Arif Zaman from the Commonwealth Business Women's Network. It was very interesting when 53 member states of the UN, or as we would say Commonwealth member states, heads of government came together. They specifically said, we want to see alternative finance tapped more for, listen for this, entrepreneurship capacity building for women. Very specific. So what's happening? There's a huge opportunity there to link things like Islamic finance, things like crowdfunding, actually all the things that you wouldn't go to a bank for, to really support entrepreneurs and capacity building for entrepreneurs. By the way, not just to do domestic stuff, to do international stuff. So what are your thoughts on that? Thank you.
Absolutely. And we started having a great conversation on this the other night, and I look forward to following it up when I get back to Australia. It's great to be connected in with the Commonwealth Women's entrepreneurship work, because you're doing some phenomenal stuff. And I completely take your point. I think it's great. We've seen a lot of calling out of it. What we still need is the cross-sectoral partnerships that are going to deliver it. I think when you're looking for examples of that, I get really encouraged by things like the 100,000 women that Goldman Sachs are doing. It stemmed off the back of the 10,000 women initiative they did, which largely focused on the delivery of education. And after they'd done and implemented that successfully, it was then this awareness that there's a funding gap and we need to think about how we partner with development banks around the world to provide different sorts of access to finance. So I think what we hope is that the success of models like that, the sharing of best practices, and can provide more opportunity or for replication or for similar sorts of models to start up. One of the interesting things that since we've started the coalition, we've begun having conversations with those sorts of organisations around too, is applying an age lens to the way that they run their programs and distribute funding. Because what's quite interesting and certainly astounded me when we started working on this sort of area at a UN and a G20 level is we don't have data on young women entrepreneurs. It's near impossible to be able to adequately number and size this group, their economic contribution, you name it. So one of the big challenges we've got is a lot of these programs, again, we talk about unconscious bias, hadn't actually been thinking about the age lens they're applying to the entrepreneurs they were working with. So the conversation we're encouraging them around is, how could we quarantine part of what you're doing for entrepreneurs under 30? Or how is it that we could think about tailoring or making a bespoke program that would work on the great principles and models you've already created, but help target and support this age group? So that's what we're starting to have conversations around. Anyone who's got suggestions or would love to contribute into that, I'd welcome a conversation with you.
Thank you, Holly, please.
Hi. This is a question for all of you, really. You're all so inspirational, so thank you for sharing your stories. And for some of you, you wouldn't have had in your country a figurehead to show you the way. So what triggered kind of the fight inside of you? Was there a person, an event? And if you could just kind of share that background.
Wait, maybe
Yeah.
Maya, do you want to go first?
Yep. For me, I really want to bring my family to the next level. So that's why I fight for education, because I believe that education will bring better life for us, for my families, and then, you know, it can be a role model for the community. So I'm from a very poor family, so I do whatever I can to get into education. So my goal is to have my kids to access to better life, better education. So that's why, you know, I set the goal, I walk to it, I work very hard. So yeah, that's drive me who I am today.
I've lived all over the world. My family's from Trinidad. I was born in Scotland. I lived in England, Egypt, Singapore. I live in New York now. But my dad is, I would consider him to be a chauvinist. But he's also one of my best friends. He's an amazing man. He's wonderful. I have two brothers and the only girl. So for me, I've always been a feminist. I didn't know that I was. My dad would call me one in kind of like a degrading way at times. And, you know, for me, I guess it's just always been that I never felt like I wasn't as good or as capable as my brothers. So I was always driven, I was always focused. When I lived in Egypt, I was exposed to extreme poverty at a very young age, and that was the first time that I realized, you know, understood the imbalance that exists in this world. And I was 5 years old looking at that and seeing it literally on the other side of our wall with my younger brother, and connecting to the kids who were digging through trash heaps to try and get food while we were climbing up our swing set to talk to them on the other side of our wall. So for me, from a very young age, I was exposed to it, and it was just something that was sparked inside of me to say that if I ever have any sort of a platform, if I ever have the ability to give back, I'm going to do it. And then when I met Alexi, my business partner in Epic, my nonprofit organization, the whole name Everyday People Initiating Change came from the fact that it wasn't about having enough money or success or power or all these things that we think we need sometimes to make a difference. It was about the fact that as everyday people, we all have the ability to initiate positive change in the world. So that is just, you know, obviously like different things, as I'm sure for everyone in the room, but yeah, that's what it was for me.
Thank you, Tanya. Ali and Holly, very quickly.
For me, professionally, I'm a lawyer, and I kind of gave up my legal practice to work in this space because I found out that there are two vulnerable groups of people in the world: is young people and women. And these two groups, from what I found out in my legal practice, were the least represented groups. Young people because they didn't have the resources, and women particularly because they didn't have a representation in the courtroom. I said I come from Cameroon, and most of the time the judge was a man and the lawyer was a man, and the woman was always out of place. But one particular incident as I started getting involved with JCI was when I went to a hospital, a maternity, and in that maternity there were 14 toilets and none of them were working. And yet there were women coming to that hospital to have children. And we don't know the number of lives that were lost, whether it's the women or the children that were not born. And that was a turning point for me in my life, because I said that the reason this was happening was because there was nobody advocating for these women. And that's the same for young people as well. Because when you look at politics and you look at leadership and look at the positions that are occupied, there's two things lacking in most of what we see. It is the absence of young people and the absence of women. So if we can change that, then I think that we can address a lot of issues that really affect the world. And that's really how I got motivated to be involved in really being an advocate for young people and as well as for women, because these are the most vulnerable groups that we have.
Thank you. Holly?
When it comes to the most significant person in my life and the biggest influence, hands down my grandmother. She's 88 next week. She's all of 5 foot tall, and she is the strongest person I know. And I remember an experience with her when I was 4 that just changed the way I thought about the world. We were in a shopping centre, and there was a young girl, she would have been maybe 13, that was working the checkout. And she'd given the older man, who was a giant sort of 6'5" guy, in front of us in line, the wrong change. And he'd proceeded to what can best be described as bully her, and loudly. He attacked her quite aggressively, calling her an idiot and things like this. And I remember watching this go on. And then before I knew it, my 5 foot tall grandmother had inserted herself between this 6'5" giant and this 13-year-old that was getting attacked, and pointed up at him and said, "How dare you talk to that young woman like that? You apologise." Yeah, go grandma. So I'm watching this 6'5" guy, firstly I don't think believing what is happening right then and there, but then proceeding to very sheepishly mumble, sorry, and grab his stuff and run out of the store. And I remember standing there like frozen to the ground, a deer in the headlights going, "Grandma, that was so brave." And she said to me, "Holly, if you don't say anything, it's the same as telling the world it's okay."
Yeah.
Thank you, Holly.
And that for me, you know, if you walk past it, if you don't say anything, that has framed the way I've thought about this issue from that point forward.
You know, and very quickly, I just thought it would be great to share my own story, because, you know, people ask me that, why do you work on gender issues? And I've been doing this for 21 years. And as a social worker in India, you know, of course, my mother played a very critical role, because I lost my father when I was very young, and she brought all 5 of us as equals. You know, it really was very clear. But I was running a very interesting gender sensitization training in a rural community in Rajasthan, and I was doing this training on women taking on leadership positions for the first time in local governance structure. 5 days of fantastic workshop. I thought it was fantastic. Then I was having a conversation with an old lady, and she said, "Son, come here, I want to talk to you." And she said, "I like what you've done, it's fantastic, you know. But, you know, we know what we're doing. But do you see those men out there? You know, those guys playing and drinking and smoking? Why don't you talk to them?" I was very confused at 21 years old. I had no idea what she was talking about. Fast forward 2 months, I went to Patna doing another gender sensitization role reversal exercise. And suddenly I had these men who were in confined space, what is called the kitchen, with their long, you know, veils, not to look up, walk very slowly, and all do our household chores. Whereas women who were suddenly on the role reversal game were now working as, you know, acting as patriarchs. I was like, wow. And that's when it hit me. And this is very early on in the feminist movement. And, you know, 20 years ago, I started talking about the role of men and boys in gender equality. So really, you know, I think it's really about those personal moments and I think inspiration, and I think we need many more of those. I know that we run out of time. Yeah. And with that note, we are still here. We're not going anywhere. Since you've done a very interesting Twitter piece, many of us are extremely active on Twitter and on LinkedIn. I'm hyper active on LinkedIn. So guys, really, with all of you, all amazing people here, we really want to work on strength to strength, because the webs provide such a fantastic framework. And I think WEPs must be brought to the next generation. You know, we're not going to reinvent and say, oh, let's create something new. And that's what we really wanted this session. I really commend the organizers for really ensuring that there is a next gen session. And it's also very obvious. It's a succession planning. And you know, in 15 years, the ones who are 20 will be 35, and the ones who are 35 will be, you know, we can't stop it. It will be 50, and the ones who are 50, I don't want to say how old they will be. But you know, it is really critical that we want to use the next 15 years very strategically. There's a lot of political movement behind it. There's lots of new energy which has come through. We must propel that to another level of equality. With that note, let me thank all the organizers, but most amazing panelists. Thank you so much.